The savannah was peaceful that morning. The sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, painting the grasslands in gold. A soft breeze carried the scent of wet earth, and the distant calls of birds echoed across the valley. For a brief moment, it felt like the land was breathing, alive, gentle, and calm. But nature never stays calm for long. Deep in the heart of the plains, beneath that glowing sunrise, danger was already forming in the clouds far beyond the hills. Near the edge of a riverbed, a lioness named Amara rested with her 2 cubs. They were barely 2 months old, playful, curious, and endlessly adventurous. The smaller one, Kian, had always been the boldest. He would often wander too close to the edge of the river, pawing at the ripples with fascination, while his mother watched carefully. His sister, Nala, was quieter, often sticking close to her mother's side. The river, once calm and shallow, was beginning to change. Days of heavy rain far away in the highlands had sent a torrent of water rushing downstream, unseen, unheard, but coming fast. The dry soil could not hold it, the valley's narrow riverbeds were about to overflow. Amara's instincts twitched. She could sense the change in the air, a low vibration in the ground, the distant growl of thunder rolling from miles away. She rose to her feet, sniffing the air. Her golden eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. The cubs looked up at her, confused, their small tails twitching. Kian, Nala, stay close, she seemed to whisper through her low rumbling purr. The wind began to howl, bending the tall grass. Birds took flight in flocks, filling the sky with frantic cries. The first drops of rain began to fall, quickly turning into a heavy downpour. The once gentle river began to churn, brown and violent. Within minutes, it swelled, rising higher, faster, roaring louder. Amara moved her cubs back toward the rocky ridge. She knew floods. She had seen the rivers rise before, but never this suddenly. The rain beat against her fur, her muscles tense as lightning tore across the sky. She picked up Nala gently by the scruff and carried her toward higher ground. Kian followed, trying to climb the slippery rocks. Then, a distant rumble, like the sound of thunder from beneath the earth. The river broke. A wall of water surged around the bend, foaming and wild. It crashed through the reeds, snapping branches, sweeping away everything in its path. Amara turned sharply, dropping Nala safely behind a rock, her eyes darting toward Kian, and what she saw froze her heart. Kian was too close to the bank. She let out a roar that cut through the storm. The cub turned, but before he could take a step back, the ground beneath his tiny paws gave way. With a terrified cry, Kian slipped and tumbled into the raging water. Amara's roar echoed through the valley. The sight of her cub being swept away unleashed something primal inside her, a surge of fear and fury that no force on earth could stop. Without a second thought, she leapt into the torrent. The cold water slammed into her body like a wall. The current pulled her under, dragging her downstream. But she didn't care. Her only focus was that tiny speck of golden fur being carried away by the flood. She fought the current, claws digging into floating debris, her body twisting with every surge. Her lungs burned, but she roared through the storm, pushing forward. The rain blurred her vision, and the river carried them both further away from the pride's territory. Kian was crying, his small head barely above the surface. He tried to grab onto a log, but the current was too strong. Every time he slipped beneath the surface, Amara's heart shattered. She lunged forward, swimming with desperate strength. Finally, she reached him. Her jaws clamped around his tiny neck, holding him above the water as she kicked furiously with her hind legs. She fought to steer toward the edge, but the current had grown too fast, too wild. The river carried them both into a narrow gorge lined with jagged rocks. A massive branch struck her shoulder, and pain shot through her side. She growled but refused to let go of Kian. Every instinct in her body screamed to keep him alive. Hours seemed to pass in seconds. Finally, she spotted something, a fallen tree bridging across the river. She swam toward it, her claws finding a rock to push against. With one final surge, she hoisted Kian onto the muddy bank and dragged herself out beside him. She collapsed on the ground, panting, soaked, trembling. The rain continued to fall, but the worst of the flood had passed. The river still raged, but they were safe, for now. Kian shivered, coughing up water. Amara licked him clean, her rough tongue brushing against his tiny body to warm him. Her own side was bleeding from the strike, but she ignored it. She pressed her body around him, shielding him from the cold. For a moment, the world was silent except for the sound of rain hitting leaves. Night fell. The storm didn't stop completely, but the thunder drifted away. Amara and Kyan were far from home now, lost in a part of the wilderness they had never been before. Her pride's scent was gone, replaced by strange smells, hyenas, crocodiles, even humans. She had to find shelter. With her cub in her mouth, she began to move through the darkness. The moonlight shimmered on the wet grass. Every shadow looked like danger. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena laughed, the kind of laugh that made the blood freeze. Amara quickened her pace, limping slightly from her wound. She found a hollow beneath a fallen tree, just big enough to hide her cub. She placed Kyan inside and curled up around him, eyes glowing in the dark. Her breathing slowed. She could rest for only a few moments. She knew predators could smell blood. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Mist clung to the valley, and the rising sun turned everything silver. Amara stepped out cautiously. She needed to find the way back, not for herself, but for Kyan. Her stomach growled. They hadn't eaten since before the flood. She sniffed the air, searching for prey, but the flood had scattered the herds. All she found were carcasses, drowned antelope, broken branches, and muddy earth. Hours turned into days. Each step was a struggle. She carried Kyan across flooded plains, through dense reeds, past crocodile-infested streams. The wound on her shoulder had begun to heal, but her strength was fading. Yet, she refused to stop. Every sunrise, she rose with new determination. Every sunset, she looked at her cub and remembered why she had to survive. On the third day, as the land began to dry, she saw something: tracks. Large, boot-shaped prints pressed into the wet mud. Humans. Normally, lions avoided people. But this time, she didn't turn away. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she had no choice. The scent led her to a ranger outpost on the edge of the forest. Smoke rose from a small fire, and two men stood near a jeep. They were wildlife rangers, men who protected animals like her from poachers and drought. When they saw her approaching, their first instinct was fear. A lioness, wounded and carrying a cub, was no small sight. One of them reached for his rifle, but the other stopped him. "Wait," he said quietly. "Look at her." Amara wasn't attacking. She stood still, eyes locked on them, her cub lying weakly at her paws. She looked exhausted, her sides heaving, but her eyes spoke more than any sound could. The rangers realized what was happening. The flood had separated her from her pride. Her cub was dehydrated and weak. She needed help, not for herself, but for him. One ranger stepped forward slowly, hands raised. Amara tensed but didn't move. The man spoke softly, his voice calm. He set a bowl of water on the ground, sliding it toward her. She watched for a moment, then pushed Kyan gently forward. The cub crawled to the bowl and began to drink. That single act, a wild lioness trusting a human with her cub, was something few had ever seen. The rangers stood in awe, silent. They didn't move closer. They didn't try to cage or tranquilize her. They simply helped. They left food and clean water, keeping their distance, while Amara guarded her cub. Over the next few days, the rangers watched her from afar. She stayed near the outpost, recovering slowly. Kyan's strength returned. Sometimes, at night, she would lift her head toward the rangers' firelight, as if acknowledging their presence, a silent thank you. By the seventh day, she was ready. The river had calmed, the land was green again, and her instincts told her it was time to return home. The rangers woke early that morning to find her standing at the edge of the clearing. Kyan beside her, stronger now, his fur glistening in the sun. She turned her gaze toward the men one last time. There was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude. Then, with a deep, resonant roar that echoed across the valley, she led her cub back into the wild. Weeks later, she reunited with her pride. The other lions recognized her scent and greeted her with low purrs and nuzzles. Kyan ran to his sister, Nala, who licked his face in delight. The family was whole again. From that day on, Amara became known among the rangers as the lioness who trusted humans. They never forgot the sight of her standing in the rain, her golden eyes filled with both pain and courage. And for years afterward, whenever the storms rolled across the savannah and the rivers swelled again, the rangers would look out into the valley and remember that story, the story of a mother's love so powerful that even nature itself could not take it away. Because sometimes, the wild isn't just about survival. It's about love, instinct, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, a bond that can overcome even the might of a raging flood.